Welcome everyone. I'm Marianne Cosgrove, Acting Chair of Humanists Australia. Before we begin this session, I wish to acknowledge that I live and work on Ngunnawal and Ngambri land and that sovereignty was never ceded. I wish to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here today. It's important that we remember whose land it is on which we tread, treat them respectfully as equals, and speak up when we see them suffering from injustice. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be made available to the public through the Humanists Australia YouTube channel and other media. Please keep your video camera off if you're concerned for your privacy. Today's Launchapalooza session has been all about activities run by Humanists Australia now and in the future. Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce Liz Forman, who's been running a very successful discussion group for the Canberra Humanists for some years now. The discussion group was initiated by Lyndon Story back in 2015, and it was this group that introduced me to humanism. Unfortunately, I can't stay for the whole of tonight's session, so after giving Liz a very warm welcome, I'll step back and hand the meeting host over to Humanists Australia's Acting Secretary, Rod Bauer. Please put your hands together for Liz.
Thanks, everybody. I'll briefly welcome everybody. We've had a couple more people just dial in, I think. Melissa, hi. Yep. So what we'll do is run this pretty much as we normally run our Canberra discussion groups. And that is with, initially we'll just go around and very briefly introduce ourselves. Then I'll give roughly well less than 10 minutes, probably about 7 minutes introduction, really just as a thought starter and to get the conversation going. We'll then go around and everyone will have 3 minutes to speak uninterrupted if they wish. There's no pressure on people to speak if they don't want to, but everyone has that opportunity. Once we get to the end of that, I'll hand over to Rod, who will look for shows of hands. So we wanted to do shows of hands through the Zoom technology, and I'll probably at that point get Rod to explain how to do that because I don't know. But that's a little way down the track yet. What we try to do in our discussion groups is allow people an opportunity to say whatever their thoughts are on the topic, work through things, put things out there for discussion. We encourage people, though, if you're in strong disagreement with somebody, by all means put forward your case, and but certainly no sort of personal kind of annoyance or anything like that. We try to treat everybody respectfully and appreciate the fact that people are sharing their views with us, and I hope everybody has a really enjoyable session. The topic for tonight is far-right populism being driven by a failure in addressing the human rights of disenfranchised segments of the population. This topic was proposed to me and I thought it was really interesting because it actually wasn't, it was put in a different way to the what I'd read and seen and heard, particularly in relation to the situation in America over the last few years. But I had never actually thought of it as being a failure in human rights for the people who were actually supporting that more populist approach in politics. So I thought it was a really interesting topic, but I certainly came to it really not knowing a great deal about that particular perspective on it. We might go around now and just introduce everybody. As Marianne was saying, I've been involved since 2015 as well. I was a participant for a couple of years in these groups and then took over the facilitating, mainly because I didn't want to see the group end because I enjoyed it so much. Rod.
I'm not quite sure what sort of ground you'd like to cover, but I'm a retired engineer, project manager, whatever. I'm the current Victorian president of Humanists Victoria. I wouldn't call myself a philosopher, but I do love a discussion. And I try to be rational and considerate of others in discussions. I do get fired up sometimes, mostly if I'm feeling attacked. But no, I don't get fired up verbally. I'm not sure what you'd like me to cover as an introduction.
That's a pretty good introduction.
Okay, good. I've done a lot of discussion groups and I love it. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate having you at this one, Rod.
I appreciate
Josie.
you having me.
Oh, hi everyone. Yep. What do I say? I guess.
Oh, you've hit mute accidentally, I think.
You're right. I did as I flicked my hair and tried to get out of my face. Yeah, I'm a accountant, CFO at the moment, and I've got 2 kids, family, you know, house, all that jazz. Currently, I am in the treasurer of Humanists Australia. Previously, I was working on the social media for Humanists Victoria, and I was a member of the committee. So I've been a member of the HORG, working to create Humanists Australia with that team, and you're looking, I guess, forward to continuing to work on that project and, you know, make Humanists Australia, you know, what we'd like it to be.
Thanks, Josie.
Yes, that's it.
Stella. I'm just calling these names out as you appear on my screen. I don't know what order we are on other people's screens.
So. Good evening, everyone. I came to the picture of humanism quite a few years ago. I've just gone blank. No, I can't think of his name. Don't know why I'm having a mental blank. Anyway, I sort of got into, I was looking at religion in schools and all sorts of other issues, separation of church and state, prayer in councils and things like that. So I've been looking and lobbying at those over the years, and humanism sort of marries into that. Yeah, I've just taken an interest, and it's good to see other activities. I think I like the communities because you can bounce ideas if you're doing a submission of some kind, that type of thing. So that's why I sort of hang around, and always say I'm going to do more submissions than I do. It's always a lack of time, and I think you also get exhausted. Like, you know, I'm talking about years of doing bits and pieces over the years. You sort of do nothing for a year and then you have a flurry, but that's where I'm at.
Thanks, Stella. Les.
Better unmute. I was Secretary and Vice President for the Humanist Society of Victoria back in the early 80s. And then I got involved with racing my family and about 5 different careers over the last 30 years. And then recently I've retired. So I started up my Rational Realm website up where I'm putting up a lot of papers on science and philosophy, because I studied philosophy at La Trobe Uni through the 1970s. And I'm currently on the committee of Humanists Victoria, and I run 2 groups. I run Philosophy Matters, which is now running on Zoom and Facebook, and I also run the Ex-Religious Support Network. That's me. Oh, and we own 2 little dogs, which keep us very entertained.
Thanks, Les. Hi, Sue.
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. I'm not quite sure where to start. I think I'm one of those people who've been a humanist most of my life and not actually known it as such. Sort of came to humanism as such quite a bit later in life, but through a lifetime working with young people through teaching and then youth services. I was a family mediator for a while, worked in community services, community development, and then sort of working with consultancy work around strength-focused approaches, largely around something called appreciative inquiry, and very involved in the global community with that. So all around strengths, about seeing, I suppose, looking for what gives energy and life to human systems and sort of helping to feed that, I suppose, and bring that to light. So in many ways, humanism, and also leaving religion as a very young child of about 14, having a very heated debate with the local minister about why Christians had any more right to get to heaven than the Jewish people, because my best friend at school at the time was Jewish, and I couldn't accept that. So that was my complete rejection of religion at the time. And I suppose, yeah, I guess my whole lifetime has been very much a sort of involved with work and, you know, sort of personal journey, I suppose, that aligns very much with humanist values. So I was delighted to come across Humanists Victoria a couple of years ago when they invited me to actually work with them as a sort of a part-time sort of community development and membership, and then administrative officer, different sort of hats for a few years. And then I've now taken on, since that contract sort of finished, I've taken on Secretary of Humanists Victoria for this next 12 months. So yeah, so still very involved, and also working in with, although not involved with the HORG, working in with Humanists Australia, and looking forward to being able to support what actually eventuates with that as well. So that's my story.
Thank you. Rosemary.
Well, I'm retired after a career of many different jobs. I've been a member of the Humanists Victoria for about 20 years. I was one time, I did a stint as treasurer for CARS one stage. I like the values of humanism, and I enjoy getting together for our discussions. That's about it for me. Oh, can we have the topic on the put up on the chat to keep us focused?
I can try. I'll try and do that while Melissa's introducing herself. Melissa?
Okay. I'm Melissa from Canberra. I did live in Melbourne once upon a time. I was born in Melbourne, actually. I was born to a family of atheists. And actually, I kind of envy some of you who have found your way to a rational worldview from a theistic start by the unaided processes of your own mind power. That always impresses me. I was just given it when I was born. And so I can't be sure that I would be able to do that and escape on my own if I had to. I'm the mother of two late teens who keep me very busy as a sort of single working mum. Also got a demanding job, and I'm tired all the time. And I've been with Humanists ACT for about a year and a half, maybe. And I was introduced mainly through Lyndon's talk about the history of an understanding of humanism, and I've come very strongly to the view that humanism is necessary and important for the challenges that face humans in the world today, and that atheism is not enough to just try and strip off problems that religion has caused us. That still leaves us with a bunch of unanswered questions about how we should live our lives. And I think in particular, although I respect the abstract philosophy, I am concerned about trying to help develop and offer a wide range of other people practical help in living a good life for people who are not academically inclined. And so, yeah, I'm particularly interested in that. And I have a bit of a love of writing. So I like to sort of write my ideas down and also read the ideas of other people.
Thanks, Melissa. Andrew, you're lucky last.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm retired I was active in the Victorian Humanists back around 1990. That's about me. And I think this topic tonight's going to be over my head, but I'll give it a try.
Well, hopefully not. I'm not particularly academic in my approach. I don't have time to be, unfortunately.
Good.
So that's why I'm always very, the introduction is just a thought starter. It's not claiming to be anything comprehensive or particularly rigorous. So feel free to shoot it down in flames. That's what it's all about.
I won't be doing that. I'll leave that to Les.
Okay, you've got permission, Les.
Les, I think Sean's still waiting.
Oh, Sean. Okay, I'm sorry. Maybe my little box has jumped around. Sean,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, I did join late. Yep, I'm Sean. I've been going to humanist meetings since the beginning as well, I think. Well, for a few years anyway. And like a few others here, I'm also interested in philosophy, and yeah, why we should be good to each other without gods. And also, Sam Harris has some very good thoughts on this topic. Well, it's more on the rise of Trump, but the same can be applied to that. But yeah, that's about it. Yeah, thank you, Les.
Thank you. Sorry to miss you. I think what happened, the boxes shuffled when I was busy typing the topic into the chat. So I missed it. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
It's Zoom. Blame Zoom.
Yeah, blame Zoom.
All right. I'll read that topic out again, and then I'll give a very brief introduction. I'm turning my timer on. My timer sounds like a duck. So if you hear a duck quacking, it means wind up what you're saying. So I'll do the same. So the topic is far-right populism being driven by a failure in addressing the human rights of disenfranchised segments of the population? I thought I'd just mention a really quick little definition of populism, not to be confused with popular. Populism is a political approach that strives to appeal to ordinary people who feel their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups. I sort of, I'll go through a couple of things from an article in a recent one in the New York Times, which was examining, the rise of this sort of Trumpism and popularism in America. And was saying that really Trumpism speaks to white Christians and white people without college degrees. It emphasised there's a real issue around social status, and something that I wasn't really aware of is that people right at the bottom of the social status scale tend to drift left, and people higher on the status scale tend to drift left, and the people who are a few rungs up tend to drift right. And the hypothesis that they were making was that people who are a few rungs up are really, really afraid of slipping back down the status rungs. So there's a really fear-driven desire to hang on to their current step. But he goes on to argue that the people that are being drawn into that populism is they don't believe that they actually do have a chance of getting much higher up the rungs. They're not going to be able to win by gaining status. So what they're striving for is, so I'm going to have to move back because I don't have my reading glasses on. I can't see my own writing here. Because I wasn't reading, I'm completely lost my place. Okay, here we are. That they're moving towards group conformity rather than status. So they're not trying to dominate by, becoming number one. They're actually trying to shore themselves up where they are with group conformity. And that's what's driving, in part, this move to popularism. He went on to talk about an inequality that's based on differences in esteem and respect, and that people who are being captured by this idea of popularism and, you know, the common people gaining the upper hand, so to speak, feel very deeply that they're no longer respected and they're no longer esteemed in people's eyes. So part of it seems to come back to that culture of status that's really strong in some societies, where people are just not basically feeling disrespected and unvalued. When this topic was proposed to me, I spent a bit of time thinking about which human rights might these people feel that they're not receiving. And I'm going to mention the ones that I think seem to be the most dominant, but I'm sure other people will have other views. I thought the most relevant ones were the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favourable conditions of work and protection against unemployment, the right to social security. I'm paraphrasing these, it take too long to read them all out in full. The right to rest and leisure, reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay, an adequate standard of living and good health care, that education shall be directed to the full development of human personality and strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, that education shall promote understanding, tolerance and friendship among all nations, racial or religion. Yeah, don't know what that word is. Religious groups, there we are. You'll hear my emphasis on that education one, because that's one that I feel probably the strongest. I mean, the work is certainly one, work and employment, but I think education is another area where, particularly in America, you can see really different levels of education in particular states and in particular socioeconomic groups. There seems to be much more variability in the quality of education that people receive and the length of education that they have. To back that up, I have very little evidence apart from some past reading that I've done, and I didn't have time to go back and reference it all. But the two areas that I noted were in science, and then the continuing teaching of creationism in schools in some of the particularly Trump states in America. But I did particularly want to mention a 2013 report which found that students in Mississippi, for example, post some of the lowest test scores in the country on national science tests. Only 19% scored proficient in a national science exam compared to 31% of all US students. So it's a really marked difference. And, you know, while I know that the Human Rights Charter doesn't go to the, you know, to say, well, you've got to get the absolute best education. I think that kind of disparity in a country like America is a bit of a concern. And you can see that coming through often when Trump supporters particularly are being interviewed. Well, there you go. That was not the duck. Sorry, that was something else. That was a reminder for me. Yeah, that ability to argue rationally, to think factually, to be more objective around looking at the facts in a situation seems often to be lacking. Well, that's convenient. My voice is not good today, so I'm coming to the end anyway. So there's a few thought starters for you. Hopefully you've all watched enough Trump stuff over the last 4 years to have some views and opinions, and people, and I know we've got a couple of educators here as well, so you might have some views on the education part of that as well. So what we'll do now, we'll go around in the order that I have you on my screen, and everyone will have up to 3 minutes if they'd like to share their initial thoughts on the topic. And then once we've done that, we'll go through to a show of hands and everyone can have lots more opportunities to say lots more things. So Rod, I've got you up next, and I'm going to set my little duck.
That's all right. I don't think I'll need 3 minutes, but you never know. You've you've actually touched on a lot of the things that came to my mind when you were talking the first part. As you got into more detail, yeah, education was certainly one that came to my mind. And I do think, yeah, lack of a basic science education is a problem. It's probably more of a problem in America from what we see on the news, but then, you know, do you trust the news? Are they showing the worst? When you read those stats, I'm appalled by the 31% even across the country as proficiency in basic science. I'd like to think that we could do better than that in Australia, but I don't know. We might get less, or we might get 50%. But I do think in this day and age, particularly, so much of what we rely on has an element of scientific understanding to it. And when we're presented with a COVID pandemic or something, I mean, science is absolutely critical to how, as a society, we deal with that sort of thing. And yeah, you can see the difference between what happens here when you listen to scientists and what happens there when you don't. And unfortunately some other countries too. So I think it's not just a lack of scientific education, but it's a disdain that then comes in for science because it's not understood and the whole concept is not understood. And when populist leaders find the science inconvenient and therefore, express disdain for science in general, they're doing a huge human rights disservice to the rest of their population. They're hiding truth from them. They're lying by omission to them, if not directly. And yeah, that's a breach of their human rights. I'm very interested in, I'd like to read that article where you talked about people being worried about slipping back down the socioeconomic ladder and not believing that they can progress up. I guess, yeah, the idea, at least having the confidence that if you behave yourself, you can at least have a decent living and, you know, potentially a holiday and an education for your kids and Medicare if you need it. That is pretty basic human rights stuff to my mind. I know it's missing in a lot of the world, but it's, again, for a politician or a would-be dictator to take that and use that as a weapon to build their populist following is just not good. That'll do for me.
The duck quacked and I'd muted myself, so that wasn't very helpful, was it? I was just thinking, oh, that was good. You just wound up as the duck was quacking. But I'll have to leave my phone off mute so that you can hear it. Stella, I've got you up next. You've got some initial thoughts?
Oh, sorry, just had a call come through.
Sorry.
That's all right. It's only a daughter demanding taxi service. What are my thoughts? It's quite a deep subject. When I think about Trumpism, he has such simple-minded answers and people just want that. I think that's what's attractive about it. He comes up with these so-called solutions and they think, well, he's got the solution and he's saying he's got the solution. so let's go with that. And I think that's where a lot of that is driven by. I can't work it out any other way. Otherwise, in my mind, I do not understand why. I think education is key. And I think what's interesting about education is, I think you have people that feel that they have the right to teach their children what they want to teach them. So I think there's a difficult line between what we think the child's educational right is and what a parent thinks a child's educational right is, whether it's indoctrinating it into a religion or homeschooling, or whether it's teaching them about the right political system or anything like that. So I think that's one of the interesting things is, I think every child is born, innocent's not the word, but they're born as a clean slate. And those children have a right to understand science. They have a right to understand all those things. And yet we have a society where, as a parent, it's my right to tell my kids what I want them to think to a degree. So I think that's one of our sticking points. So I think about that a lot because I, lobby on when they bring religion into schools and that type of thing. So yeah, I think education is key, and I don't know how you, ensure that. I mean, who's to say what a good education is? Like, you get people arguing over that, unfortunately. I know that's my contribution.
Thanks, Stella. Les, I've got you next.
Thanks. I must say, I now have a better understanding of the actual question. When I read addressing the human rights of disenfranchised segments, I was thinking of the disenfranchised Aborigines, blacks in America, Asians, Muslims who are being, shouted at. I was thinking of that, and I thought, oh, it's really the other way around. But now I understand you mean disenfranchise this people at the lower rungs of the socio-economic ladder. And here, and it's certainly the case, the middle class has certainly been squeezed out since the 1980s and the gutting of the manufacturing sectors in the UK, here in Australia, in the US. And with the gutting of the manufacturing sectors, they're then going into the service industry, and they're working piecemeal as Uber drivers, just going from, delivery pizza to delivery pizza, working, some people are working literally 3 to 4 jobs, 3 or 4 jobs to get food on the table. So I think the biggest challenge and the biggest human right that has been forgotten about is organising it so that people have meaningful full-time work, and B, that they get a reasonable week's pay for a reasonable week's work. And that's what's happened over the last 20, 30 years. Productivity has increased, but wages have flattened out. So that's a basic human right to be able to get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Some states in the US have even eliminated a minimum wage, which used to be mandated. Some states have got rid of that, claiming that that it will suppress employment. Employers are less inclined to employ workers. And this is the big paradox of Trumpyism, that these people on the lower socioeconomic rungs of the ladder, they need more social supports, they need more equity, and yet they're voting for a president who's giving absolutely less of that. They're giving tax cuts to the billionaires, squeezing minimum wage, trying to get rid of Social Security and medical insurance, Obamacare. It's just madness how these people in their droves are voting against their own interests when they believe they're voting in their interests. So I think education is certainly important, and there's no value placed on teachers in America. Some teachers I think at one time base teachers were earning $26,000 US a year, and teachers were having to get 2 or 3 jobs. They're teachers, full-time teachers, and having to get other part-time work as well to get food on the table. So I think the disparity in income and wealth between the very rich and the very poor, that's widened, and UK is the worst example of that, and then US and here in Australia as well, the disparity between the rich and the poor. And that is an outcome of this ignoring of this basic human right to get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. I think dead right. And I think you picked up a lot of those key points, Stella and Rod and Elizabeth. I'm certainly with you there.
Thanks, Liz. Sue, have you got any initial thoughts for us?
I do, and I'm probably going to deviate a little bit from that because, interestingly enough, the people I've encountered, maybe not quite extreme to the populist idea, but the right-wing people who sort of have the very strong right-wing views have not been in the disenfranchised sort of part of my circle, I suppose. And the most rabid Trump supporters I met, well, while we were traveling in the United States back, in England last year, actually 2019, who were from the United States. They were both quite well off. He was a retired engineer, I think worked for many years in the Air Force. She was a qualified, I think she'd been a qualified, she'd run in management, etc. And they were absolutely quite rabid Trump supporters, which we didn't know until the end of the conversation. We'd had this wonderful, normal conversation about the sorts of things that, retired couples, or that they were talking about their grandchildren and their holiday to the UK and the fact they were traveling Europe next year. And so they were not part of the disenfranchised segments when we talk about socioeconomic things. I think some of the driving forces, though, are to do with the fact that as human beings, most people strive for certainty. Living in uncertainty where you don't have the answers is quite a scary place to be. And I think, therefore, for a number of people who they're uncertain about what the future holds, they're uncertain about being able to sustain things economically around them, they're uncertain, they don't have the answers. I think religion provides that sense of certainty for some people. I think populism, particularly because of the nature of the leaders who get up and say, I have the answers, I'm going to fix it, I know exactly what to do, and this, and I'm going to solve it all for you. I think that has an appeal. And that's not necessarily to do with the level of education, it's the bubble that people live in, that sense of fear of what they might lose. And also increasingly the bubbles that we live in terms of the media, if you like, that with which we immerse ourselves. And increasingly with social media, the algorithms say that if you read certain articles, that's what you're going to get fed. So people aren't moving outside that to see other views or to see the different sort of views. They're being fed that particular type of news all the time. So I think those kind of factors come into it as well. And I'm agreeing with what everyone else has said. I'm not saying that isn't true. It's a case of and, not an either or. I think there's an and to add to it. So thank you. They'll probably do for me without the duck.
Thanks, Sue. Rosemary. You need to unmute. Yep.
Yes, I'm really just sort of shocked by, like Les, by the fact that so many of the Trump supporters are fighting against their own interests, that they're fighting against the Obamacare, that they're fighting against the social institutions that would give them support and help them. And it's just, that's really all I've got to say at this stage.
Thank you. Sean, have you got some initial thoughts for us?
Yeah, I do. I'm not sure if you can hear somebody's alarm, hopefully it stopped. Yeah, it baffles me as well why people would vote against their own best interest, but I think it's because the media convinces them that it's actually in their interest to vote against the Democrats, or in the case of Australia, to vote against, Labor. And when somebody mentioned the easy slogans, I completely thought of Tony Abbott with the stop the boats and all of that stuff. So we have our own problems. But with the topic, I argue that it's imagined human rights of disenfranchised segments, because whenever you try to make things equal, like gay marriage, we want them, we want it to be equal. People will think we're taking away their rights and we're destroying their marriage. So, and yeah, they genuinely believe that they're voting against, because I've also spoken with some Americans and I'm like, why? Because I spoke with a Black Trump supporter who was an atheist, and I'm like, why do you support, Donald Trump, someone who's got the religious right on his shoulder and who appoints all these religious whack jobs? And they genuinely believe that it's against the woke culture, the far left. So they believe they're voting against the woke culture, and they're voting against this political correctness culture by electing somebody who's the complete opposite, who says what he wants, who isn't afraid of offending anyone, and is a big loudmouth, especially on Twitter. So yeah, they vote against the best interests because they genuinely believe that by voting for Trump, they'll stop all this. Well, at least they're voting against what they really don't like, which is the woke culture, Black Lives Matter, which I support. But yeah, they've bought into this right-wing media who have about it. And yeah, all those things they hate. So those things they hate, I guess, they hate the things you're voting against more than their own interests. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Not. All right, I've got Melissa next, then Josie, then Andrew. Melissa.
Thanks, Liz. Everyone's made some great points, but I would just add some extra things that they've stimulated me to think about. I think the point that Sean made is very important. It's not necessarily what people are voting for as what they're voting against. And I think we do that too. And I think just about everyone I have heard in Australia, and I live in a bubble like everybody else, I try and get out of it by reading the Murdoch press and things like that, and occasionally listening to people that I don't know very well what they think to get other views. But most of the people I hear are very anti-Trump, and everything I've heard people say is a criticism of Trump. Now, I mean, you could go on for a million years about what's wrong with Trump, but everyone speaks as if the assumption is that the alternative is someone good. So why would you vote for Trump, right? But an enormous number of people, although Trump frames them as Trump supporters because he is a brilliant marketer, he calls these people who are voting for them Trump supporters, and yet they're wearing his vote for Trump, I'm a Trump supporter, made America great hat. So we think they're crazy for Trump, but actually it's what they're anti. And Trump is just their guy who's anti the thing that they're against, right? It's not that they think Trump's that wonderful. He has successfully emphasized and highlighted things that they don't like about his opponents. And yet when we sit around in our lounge rooms discussing what's wrong with Trump, we never talk about what's wrong with the Democrats, do we? I've never heard anyone talk about what's wrong with the Democrats, except back when Bernie Sanders was running and people then would talk about what's wrong with his opponents. But seriously, like many people voted for Trump originally because they couldn't stomach Hillary Clinton. And there's a lot of very good, strong criticisms of Hillary Clinton, very valid criticisms. And you can't, like you might say, oh, but I have stronger criticisms of Trump. But the point is people were focused on what was wrong with Hillary, and they were doing the other thing. They were saying there's all these things wrong with Hillary Clinton, and then just taking Trump as a blank canvas of someone who wasn't Hillary Clinton. And we tend to totally miss that when we're looking at the picture from over here. A second point was made interesting. Sean was talking about the black guy who's an atheist and he's voting for Trump. We at the book club, we've talked about, have we done it yet? But the book How to Be an Anti-Racist has come up for a lot of discussion. And that book is fantastic. And in it, the black author, he's a black American, describes how as a middle-class black American, he floated in a sea of taking for granted the fact that there were those blacks over there, the ones where the women weren't married and had the children and they were having gangs and drugs and dropping out of school, and those bad black people. And within the African American community in the United States, and the same thing applies in many other communities, they would be affected by all the propaganda they would read in the newspapers. And since they knew it didn't apply to them and their family, they thought there's other bad black people. And so this gentleman that Sean is talking about may well believe that he's one of the good blacks, not the ones that Trump is against. And that those bad black people who are bringing black people into disrespect need to be thumped and dealt with so the good black people can have a good life.
Thanks, Melissa. All right, Josie, I've got you up next.
All right, okay. I've had so many thoughts through everyone's other thoughts that leading me into different directions of what I could add to the discussion. And I guess I think that the human rights specifically that are definitely hinge on the education piece and the fair wage, fair pay, as per Les said, and as per Stella's thing on the education side. But I do think there's another factor. There's a factor in the first place of, well, specific, I think, to Trumpism or popularism is, sort of harks back to kind of like our status quo. Like as humans, we do like try to be up the status quo on the rungs of our society and our tribes and our communities. And by being part of the Trump tribe or the Trump popular, it's like being part of the popular group, like you're a part of something that is, you're part of the popular group. You don't want to, and I think it did come back to that article. I think it's part of what it was hinting at was that people don't want to drop down the rungs of the ladder, but I think it's, that social status ladder. It's just like the popular kids at high school in some ways, right? But I think that is able to come about, and in particular in some of the Western countries where you've got capitalism at play, where you've got capitalism fighting against the socialist values of trying to sort of make it fair for all in the society, rather than a winner takes all kind of attitude. And in capitalism in conjunction with then a lack of education opportunity makes it very easy, I think, for these popularist types to influence and create these kind of cliques that they can, call to arms. And what is the thing that the popular kids at school do? They bully the other kids. They push down the other kids. They push them down to lift themselves up so that they can be the best, the most popular, the ones that are seen to be good. And partly if you are not getting a fair wage, you are not getting fairly treated in receiving, partly I think, and not that it's anecdotal, because as was pointed out by Sue, not all supporters are low socioeconomic, but they may have had an education, but that education, the piece I think that's truly missing is not science, because it doesn't matter whether you know physics or not. It matters whether you know critical thinking. It matters whether you can think for yourself. It matters whether you've learnt respect for others. It matters whether you've been given a good value system. It's education in basic human rights itself and respect. Those things are the things that should be a basic human right in education for all people, because on the back of that, you can then learn the other things because you are given the open opportunity to do so. And, there are many fields of study, but you don't have to be a scientist to respect science. You don't have to be a scientist to respect critical thinking, and not all scientific conclusions are correct or even given, because not all scientists are correct and not all scientists are good, right? Science is cold and logical. It's got nothing to do with, humanity in terms of it is outside of that. So the real thing we should educate on is humanity and humaneness. And if you're given that human right, then to me, those people wouldn't be subjective to be influenced by this kind of populism and Trumpism, because, they wouldn't be interested in it.
Thanks, Josie. Andrew, you got some thoughts to share with us?
Not much. I basically agree with what everybody said. Just a word of caution now. I think there's more than one reason why children bully other children. And another thought is that science isn't just needed to understand things like the pandemic. I think it's needed in everyday things like doing the shopping and understanding the advertising that comes at us. That's all.
Thank you. All right, so hopefully everybody's had an initial opportunity to share some of their thoughts. So we normally now go into a show of hands, and when we're in person, we do that in person. But because Rod's now the I don't know what it's called, but the moderator for the Zoom,
the host, yeah.
You're the one that's got access to the little hand. So do you mind explaining to us how we raise our hands?
Sure.
And then if you don't mind keeping track of that, I'll keep on with the timer.
I was going to have a practice run because I haven't used it much myself, Liz.
Okay.
And unfortunately, because Marianne's made me the host, I can't do a test run myself. But my understanding is if you open up the participants screen, which you can do by clicking participants down the bottom of your window.
I see it.
Then you'll get a list of people now. Yeah, I'm seeing
down the bottom of that screen. Then there's a little row of icons, and one of them is a little hand, and it says
that's
raise
the
hand.
one. Yep. So I can see.
So,
Les, I'm getting hands popping up and down all over the place.
Excellent.
As everyone's having a look at it. So yeah, it's me. If I look at the list of participants, and you might be able to too, I don't know, you'll see the hands popping up next to people's names. And it looks like when the hands go up, it moves those people to the top of the thing so that I don't have to have, I thought I'd have to have it where I could see everybody. So the two hands that are up at the moment are Melissa and Les. So do you want to, are you going to
call? Maybe if you just call on people when their hands,
the hands
like
go up? Okay.
Whoever's next hand is just call on people in turn, and I'll do the timing.
Good. Oh, Melissa.
So maybe Melissa,
you look like you're up first.
So I just wanted to call people back to the specific topic, which is about populism and whether human rights of people and whether they're being disenfranchised. Disenfranchised is, I guess, we often think of it as not able to vote, as someone mentioned earlier, people who can't register to vote, as has happened a lot in the United States, and which we've done to Aboriginal people here in Australia in the past, and to some extent still. I think it's meant in a broader sense of people who don't feel they are partaking of the decision-making in their society. So that's how I interpret the question. And I think it's important. The human brain has a tendency to take what we see and turn it into a pattern. But harking back to the importance of science, I think science is ethically neutral, but it can ideally teach us to look at evidence. And therefore, if we wish to ascribe a rise of populism in the United States to something, we must consider the fact there is evidence of populism in a number of major countries around the world over the last 5 years or so. And if we have explanations that are particular to the United States, that doesn't mean they're not valid. Clearly, they could be particular circumstances in the United States. But unless we look at the fact we have Boris Johnson, we've got Modi in India. I'm really terrible at names. We've got the guy in the Philippines, the dictator who likes to shoot people because they're drug addicts. We've got Erdogan or whatever his name is in Turkey, and no doubt other people could supply other names. I think we should at least attempt to look at explanations which would fit the majority of countries showing this phenomenon. And that's where I personally struggle. But the question is, are these people, and I guess when you say support the populists, it was mentioned about the quite well-off people who support Trump. But the thing is, that's not paradoxical. Trump's giving them tax cuts, and it's not paradoxical for them. But the question is, these people who are supporting populism, and it's paradoxical because the populist people they elect are not going to act, at least in their financial interests. So I don't know, if you look at India and the Philippines, you get the distinct impression that the rise of the populists related to fear. The fear seems to be a combination of a fear of other ethnic/religious groups or other nearby countries. Certainly in India, there's fear of Pakistan and fear by the non-Muslim, mainly Hindu majority of the Muslim minority, which is a well-founded fear based on the large number of violent acts that happened in both directions within living memory. But also economic fear, as has been pointed out by some of our speakers, that there has been a rise in job insecurity, and this has been a global phenomenon. So I think that if we look for a global explanation, we would be forced to think that the ethnic differences have been there for a very long time and have been a cause of tension for a very long time, and people have exploited that to try and get to power. But the thing that seems to have changed is the globalization and the change from relatively more secure work to relatively less secure work around the world. And that this has led, I think, to fear. And then the ethnic fears have always been there, and people have just added them onto the fire, in my opinion.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks. Les, you had your hand up, but you've taken it back down. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll wait.
You'll hold back. So Sue's next in line then.
Yeah, I think going on what Melissa was saying, that was sort of something I was referring to earlier. I think a lot of the populist movements, if you like, are based on fear, and it's fear of the other, fear of those, those migrants, those, those people coming in and taking our jobs. That uncertainty aspect of it, I think, is feeding a lot of it, and the fact that the populist leaders reckon they've got the answers, and that paradoxical element, I'm not 100% sure that's entirely true in this. Well, it's true, and I think the belief is that although it seems paradoxical that what the populist leader is going to do is actually against their interests, they are convinced that what the populist leader is going to do is close the borders. They're going to keep all those, all those foreigners out. So that's going to help me. That I start to believe that it's those people who are meaning that I'm finding it difficult to get a job. They're coming in and taking our jobs. They're prepared to work cheaply, so I can't get a job. I can't have my needs met. I can't feed my family. So the populist leader who says I'm going to keep them out and demonizes them, if you like, that's kind of feeding into that attitude as well. So I think there's an element of that as well, that what the populist leaders promise them, even though they don't deliver, and it can be seen over the next period of time that they're not delivering, I think people remain convinced that somehow it is in their best interests to vote for those particular leaders, to actually vote those parties into power, because they're somehow protecting us from what's even worse in some way. I think that they get convinced of that. Thank you.
Les, you're on.
If nobody else wants to talk, I just had a thought that the modern monetary theorists put down our current problems with lack of employment and casualisation, and the increasing, and especially the increasing distance between the very rich and the very poor, and the squeezing out of the middle class. It comes down to the rise of neoliberalism, especially since from the 1990s, Thatcher, or even before that, with Thatcher and Reagan, deregulation, and companies were able to build up massive profits without the social net to capture those people who were left out of the system. And I'm thinking, I was going to say a little bit about what's attractive, the two main attractions for people who vote Trump and the other right-wing demagogues in other countries. And one of them is the propaganda piece that if we give more money to the capitalists, the people who hold capital and create the jobs, if we give more money to them, that allows them to give you and you and you a job. And that may be true, but the challenge is, without the safety nets and the minimum wage standards, more people will get jobs, but they'll need to have 3 or 4 jobs to earn enough that the wages will be squeezed down. So certainly no guarantee getting more jobs that you're still going to be equitably paid. I think the other main attraction for people who vote for the populist demagogues is the notion of freedom, or especially in the US, the notion of freedom. And we see that in the anti-mask wearing, and we see it in the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. And I think that might probably, a lot of commentators say that goes back to the American Revolution, this idea of being free of British rule, and the way that was written into the Constitution with the right to bear arms. And whenever a social safety net like Obamacare is mentioned, literally the cries go up: communism and socialism. That is so far ingrained in the American psyche that we've got to be free. We've got to be free. We don't want governments telling us what to do and how to live our lives. Again, as we're saying, paradoxically, it's to the detriment of the people in the lower socio-economic rungs. I've just got a quick question from Melissa. Melissa, it looks like you have your own electron microscope in your study. If it is, where do I buy one at a good price?
It's a normal microscope when I'm in my office at work.
Oh, are you? You're not in your study at home. Okay.
I'm multitasking.
Very good.
Very good.
I actually do have a microscope at home. It's not as good as this one, though.
Right. Is there anything interesting down there? Down the lens?
Yeah, I'm looking at a patient with interesting autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got Rosemary with her hand up, and I can't put my hand up because I'm the host. I don't get to do it, but I'll put my hand up after Rosemary.
Let yourself in.
Okay. What I was wanting to say is that, Melissa, you're right about the fear, but what's the right-wing leaders, would-be leaders do is that they prey upon the fear and they spread a lot of propaganda. And it's a lot of the objection to Hillary Clinton was based on propaganda spread by the Trump campaign. The Trump support in Florida, for example, amongst the retirees, was the propaganda saying that Democrats are going to be communists. And it's just propaganda. It's not, there's nothing valid about it, but it preys on the fears. And it's the spreading. I mean, we saw Tony Abbott against Julia Gillard here. And to the point where she had to stand aside and let Kevin Rudd back.
Because of a fear campaign?
Yes. Anyway, that's all I had to say.
Yeah, I think you've led me right into one of the things I wanted to say, that we have those fear campaigns here too. And even as recently as the last election, it was fear of people losing their franking credits or losing their, what was it? Oh, the death taxes are going to come in and get you, you know, which was a fear-based campaign on financial stuff. But, you know, we've had them for years. John Howard ran a very successful fear campaign on terrorists coming here in fishing boats from Indonesia with their children. It was just crazy stuff, but people bought into it. The other reason I put my hand up was just to clarify for Josie, when I'm pushing science science education, I'm not talking about everybody becoming a physicist or a chemist or something. I'm talking about understanding how science works. And it's basically what you said, it's critical thinking. The only difference is with science, you throw in some measurement as well. So you measure things and then you critically think about them. And that's science. And I'd like people to appreciate that. Okay, I don't see any more hands up. Liz, what do you do in that circumstance?
Oh, throw a question out there, Rod.
Good-o. Off you go.
I haven't got any prepared. Well, I guess one thing that I didn't really touch on was, even if that question is, the answer is yes, the human rights of groups of employed people in wealthy countries are being violated, if you like, and they don't have good work and they don't have good education. What does anybody do about it? Who should be standing up and saying something about that or doing something about that? Is that the UN? Is that other signatories to particular agreements? I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts about that.
Is it humanist societies?
Yeah, maybe. There's a couple of physical hands up there. Josie and then Les.
Yeah, sorry, it's hard on the phone to put your hand up. It's not quite the same. Yeah, I guess the whole, the education piece, I think it was Sue or Stella was talking about how, education is subjective. Like what one person thinks is a valid education could be completely different to what someone else does. So where education is a basic human right, how do we choose who decides what that education is? And I think that point that someone made about the parental right to choose what education the child gets, as opposed to, say, I guess an overarching societal agreement as to what a basic education should look like, could be a place to start. And I think addressing that first and foremost would be, yeah, like a really good place to start. So whoever, I'm not quite sure who would be that person would be, or organisation would be to start, you know, doing that. But, you know, a big sort of think tank or organisation that, you know, sort of globally decides what is the basic human right of education, what does that actually look like, and what should it contain and what should it not contain, potentially even, could be a really good place to start.
Yes, I agree. Les, I think you had your hand up too.
Yeah, I think on the on a United Nations or global approach to stepping into particular nation states and telling them what to do, the UN Declaration of Human Rights is pretty weak, not prescriptive at all, on what are called the positive rights. So the negative rights, which guarantee your liberties, right to life, right to association, right to belief, for example, right not to be interfered with. And then later on in the UN Declaration, there's the positive rights, right to clean air, good environment, proper education, gainful employment. These are the obligations of government to give to you, the citizen. Now, they're pretty loose on that. They're not really prescriptive. And I think that's for a good reason, because, every nation states are sovereign. It's up to the government of each sovereign state, along with their citizens in a democratic state, to decide how they will govern themselves, whether they're going to have a more rigorous tax system or a less rigorous tax system, how much education they're going to give free to each citizen's child. These are things that are properly determined by the nation state in concert with their voting citizens. So I can see reason for the UN and the UN Declaration of Human Rights not to be too prescriptive on that. And I think I'd like to leave it. I'd like to leave it like leave it like that. And the UN has got massive problems in fixing the enormous suffering through communicable diseases, through poor sanitation, the current sustainable development goals, which superseded the previous Millennium Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are aimed at fixing those things that are causing enormous suffering, disease, early death, and so on. And they've got enough. The UN's got enough problems on its own, just making progress on those really important goals instead of stepping on nation states' toes and telling them what to do about, what the minimum employment level unemployment level you should have. I think we better leave that to the nation states. That's not to say that nation states have an excuse for electing populist leaders like Donald Trump, of course. But that's where the responsibility lies with nobody else but us as voting citizens. We've got to get to the ballot box and make our voice known. I'm really pleased that in the last US election, it was the highest voter turnout, I think, forever, something like 70%. It was just great. Need to have that every time, and even more. And that comes down to education too. That's part of citizenship education, instilling in our young children their responsibilities as a citizen of the state, the responsibility to be informed and the responsibility to make your voice heard when it comes time to vote.
We've just been joined, I think, by, is it Jeff? Rainbow Atheists?
Yes. Hello, folks. Sorry I'm late.
That's all right. I'm not sure how much of the discussion you would have caught, but we're sort of coming towards the end, but we kind of talked ourselves out, I think. So we'd be interested to hear your views on our topic. Do you know the topic?
Well, I've only sort of heard the last few minutes, so I don't know exactly what the topic is.
Okay. So I'll read you out the topic. The topic was, is far-right populism being driven by a failure in addressing the human rights of disenfranchised segments of the population. And I went on to clarify that the disenfranchised segments that we were looking at were those people who were clearly voting Trump and not, you know, not sort of other marginalised groups. Gosh, I don't know whether maybe Rod can do a better summary than I can of where we've got to so far.
Not just in the US, Liz.
Not just in the US, that's right. I don't know, does anyone else want to summarise where we got to? Sue's got her hand up. We're going to give you a quick summary, Jeff, so that you can
if I've
tell
lost
us what you
contact.
think.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm talking, but it sounds like you can't
Can
hear
you
me.
hear me now, Jeff? Hello, Jeff, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Can, good, yeah.
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
I think the conversation has ranged very widely around a number of things, including the sort of responsibilities of, you know, or the need for education, all the rights for to have the right to education, the importance of teaching clear thinking, those sorts of things as well. And also the fact that it's not necessarily actual disenfranchisement or economic hardship, but sometimes it's perceived. So it's the way people see their world and whether or not they're being threatened by external, like migrants coming in to take our jobs, etc. So it's that, and there's also the reality of insufficient education in science and various things like that. I think the other thing that I was going to now try to summarize. I've lost what I was going to say before. It was to do with, no, I think I've lost it. I'll have to come back. I'll think of it in a minute. I know you asked who is responsible to do something about this. And, you know, Les has covered, Les and others have touched on sort of the responsibility of governments and nation states and the UN, etc. I think it's kind of got to be multifaceted at all kinds of different levels, though, because there's also that individual, as Les sort of inferred about the voting as well, but making sure that our voices are heard, but also our responsibility as humanists, I think, to help create an environment and a space where other voices are heard, perhaps those that don't sort of speak up as much, etc. So I think that's important too. And as someone who does a lot of talking, I need to shut up and let other people have a say too. So that's probably enough for me. But yeah, all different sort of levels of society, from education, working with kids in schools about responsibilities as well as rights, and about, you know, mutual respect, and, you know, about the fact that I think one of the rules in one of the schools I remember was not a joke unless both people are really laughing. So, you know, it's those sorts of things about, you know, how do we help teach kids that sense of autonomy and efficacy and respect and the value, those sorts of values as well. So I think that falls down to the level of individual parenting and teaching skills and those sorts of things too. That'll do.
Yeah, we also touched on the human right for work and for being adequately compensated for work that isn't unreasonably long hours, which is something that, you know, we thought perhaps was a human right that people were missing out on in some of those groups.
I think Stella had her hand up for a while.
Well, I was going to let Jeff give his initial thoughts first, if that's all right, and then we'll. Sorry, I didn't see yours, Stella.
That's okay.
So we'll give you a go, Jeff, and then we'll come back to Stella.
Well, at the risk of either repeating something someone's already said or being completely off topic and ignorant of everything that's preceded me, I think, to me, as a former teacher, I do see education as really important, and it plugs into critical thinking, and it plugs into awareness, empathy, all these things that socialization skills and empowerment skills that need to be taught. But it's more than that, because I see education as a lifelong learning process. And I'm reminded of something that Carl Sagan said when he was in Cosmos, when he was talking about the Great Library of Alexandria and all the knowledge of the ancient world, or as much of it as had ever been collected in one place. And it was there, and eventually the library was destroyed. Not as dramatically as some accounts have it, just sort of, oh yes, basically the Christians stormed it and burnt it down. It wasn't quite that simplistic, but over a period of time, it decayed, it rotted, and it collapsed. But his point was, when that happened, the people outside didn't really know, didn't really care. The fact that all this knowledge about agriculture, about what was then known about medicine, about science, astronomy, and so on, cosmology for ancient world knowledge, it was all gone, and they didn't know and they didn't care, because to them it didn't make any difference. They were out in the fields tending crops or doing whatever, and to them all the science and all the knowledge of the ancient world had been behind dusty doors and had been completely divorced from their lives and their reality. And I think he told that story as a bit of a warning, I think specifically to scientists, but I think also to the rest of us, that all knowledge is worthwhile, but it has to be applied, it has to be relevant to people. In terms of education, it's not just, I used to say this to year 12 students when they'd come to me at the end of the year and say, hooray, we're walking out the gate, we never have to read another book, or no, your education's finished. And I'd say to them, are you kidding? Your education, your adult education is really just starting now. For the rest of your life, you've got to go out, use your brain, read, research, come to intelligent, informed, hopefully, decisions of whatever you read, and so on and so on. And I think that's really what part of what humanists should be doing, about not just educating in the formal sense of, I'm a teacher and you're a student or something, but getting the information out there in every possible way, whether it's YouTube, whether it's books, whether it's conversations, whatever, making people aware. I came across this last year because I'm a big space buff, and it was the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. And most people I talked to sort of said, well, yeah, that's nice, but who cares? They were the informed ones. The others were saying, oh, we don't even believe it happened. And I thought, well, you're here, you're in a world where we have geostationary satellites that give you GPS. We have mobile phones that have greater computer power than the Apollo spacecraft, because in no small part because the space program fueled microchips and a whole range of things. We have heart monitors, we have CAT scans, we have all these things that are a direct result of the space program, and that information has not been communicated. And I think, to me, that's what we should be doing about everything, teaching critical thinking, but giving them the information as well on every area of life, not just science, politics, medicine, whatever. So that's my six cents worth.
That's
yeah,
good,
great
Jeff.
examples. Thanks, Jeff. Stella.
I don't really have much to say now. I think most of it's been covered since I haven't had but no, that's all right, and others. Yeah, just on the education side of things, I think someone said, we should, how do we find an objective thing of what we all agree on is the right form of education? I think you've got to base it on science and facts and not sticking out claims. But I don't understand, it still astounds me that we live in a country like Australia and we have the National School Chaplaincy Program in our schools. How are we ever going to get across the line that we need to make science a priority when we've already spent $1 billion plus on putting religious workers in, and they have to sign Nicene creeds. They have to agree that Jesus rose from the dead, and they have to agree that Mary was a virgin. They have to agree to all that before they're allowed near students. It just astounds me. It just makes me so angry, and I don't even know. So from that foundation, how do you get across that let's just have support workers, not religious workers, and then let's just get on with teaching science and factual information? I don't know, religion I don't understand. It's been around for 2,000 years. I don't expect to knock it on the head in my lifetime. But I think religion has a lot to answer for in terms of holding back development. Religion, I think, is what polarizes people. Trumpism, to me, is a form of religion. And he that's how he gets by. That's how his message is. He's like a preacher, and he just tells the people, creates tons of fear, as people have mentioned. Fear is critical for his message to succeed. If it wasn't for fear, Trump would be nowhere near where he got. So yeah, I don't even know how we get by in Australia with our foundation of this billion-dollar chaplaincy program, and then say, oh no, we just want it to be science. It's not. I wish I could be more optimistic, but after years of trying to battle it, it's anyway. It's my 5 cents worth.
Well, we're almost up. We're almost at our end time. So Sue's going to have a final word for us.
You're on mute, Sue.
I think there's a bit of a paradox sometimes, because working with some of those, I think so many of the schools, they had the chaplaincy program, and yes, there's a lot of the religious-based stuff behind it and why they called it that and who they're getting in. But the reality is, I think a lot of schools, those people they're not actually pushing religion at all. They are there and just working as counsellors. So I think that it's certainly the ones that I worked with in my time in schools, that was the case when they had some of them. It wasn't as broadly spread as it is now. I do think that recognising the importance of secular counselling is really important as well. I'm not denying that, but I do think, that it's a little bit grayer perhaps than we might at first assume. And also, I think that thing about lifelong education that Jeff was talking about was absolutely crucial. And the other interesting thing is there was a move back in the late 80s, 90s. It's like, when we've had good economic circumstances, there are other kinds of skills in education have been valued. And then in the early 90s, a lot of those were axed, and science was the one that got the boost. Science was the big thing in schools. And so art, music, drama, dance, all those sorts of creative activities were axed, and those sorts of teachers were cut out of our schools. This is in the state system anyway. That's the system I was in. So I think it's about how do we have a rounded education? How do we actually incorporate those sorts of things? Because appreciation of those creative aspects not only engage young people more effectively in education, but I think there's a range of skills that go with those that creates a more rounded experience, a more rounded human being than purely only focusing on the science education. I'd like to see a whole gamut of things in schools rather than just that. And education's always been driven by what the employers are kind of looking for at the time, really, and what universities are looking for. So anyway, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Well, it's been a very interesting discussion. We've had some different views, and it's good to have a range of expertise and background and experience to contribute, so that we've had a pretty good look at the topic. Thank you, everyone. We've lost a few people who've had to go when our time was up. So if there's no final thoughts from anyone, we might call it a night.
Thank you very much, Liz.
Thanks
Liz.
everyone for attending.
Thank you.
And
Thanks,
I hope you
Liz,
get to some more of the Humanists Australia events.
Yeah, I hope so. It's great that we can have these discussions across the country instead of just across one city. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
It is. But it will be nice to get back to the pub. I'm hoping next
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we need both. We need both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
All right.
Thanks,
Good night,
everyone.
all.
See you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good night, Duck.